Welcome to this Let's Play of Kerbal Space Program First Contract. Now, if you remember from the last episode, we left Jeb out in the grasslands, so we better go to the tracking station and recover him. Now, we've got two tracked objects that are still out on the grasslands. We've got Jebediah and his craft, so let's recover Jeb first. And we've gained another 25 reputation, giving us another total of 162. And if we recover his craft, we'll pick up 38 science, giving us a total of 70 science. And we pick up his command pod, his parachute, 2 goo containers, and the monopropellant that was in the command pod. So that gives us a grand total of 27,306 funds to build future vehicles, so that's great. Let's go and visit Gene over in the mission control building and see what contracts he has for us. Right, we've got some new contracts from the R&D group, Periapsis, was that Demolition Enterprises, Rocamax, and we still have the Orbit Kerbin challenge. But there seems to be 3 contracts here which are all around doing things that are landed at Kerbin. So in this case it's test the LV909 liquid engine whilst landed at Kerbin, and we'll get 75 funds in advance, and from completion we'll get 160 funds, 4 science and 4 reputation. If we test the LVT 45 engine while landed at Kerbin, we'll get 95 funds in advance, get 210, get 6 science and 4 reputation. And for testing the Sepratron landed, you can see we make another 50 funds in advance, 110, 6 science and 4 reputation. So I think we can probably do those all in one go. So we will accept all of those contracts and then head over to the vehicle assembly building to build us a craft that will do all of those contracts all at once. So if we begin with a command pod and a parachute, obviously Jeb wants to be safe completing this contract. Next we have been given our 3 sample devices, because obviously we haven't researched them yet because we've not got that much science. So there's the 909, there is the LVT 45, and there is the Sepratron. So we've got 3 different types of engine to launch. Now we've already got some fuel tanks, so we can place a fuel tank there in the center for the LVT 45 engine. Now that's an experimental engine. In other words, we've been given it as part of the contract, and one of the advantages of the LVT-45 engine we'll see in the future is that it has thrust vectoring, which means we can steer our craft using this engine. It's not just a purely straight up and straight down engine. Right, now we need to test this engine. So what I think we'll do is we will stick a couple of tanks on. We'll press X to get 2 tanks on, so we can have 2 symmetrical engines. So that looks good. And finally we'll put our 2 Sepratrons on either side of the command pod. Now we can manage the thrust of these engines if we want to, so what we could try is just setting the thrust right down, so we're not going to go far from the launch pad, save a bit of time. Notice that because we had symmetry on, the thrust limiter is set equally on both, so you just right click the engine to see what the thrust limiter is set to and then adjust it accordingly. We can do the same here, right click on this engine, set it right down, not quite down, there we go, right down 6%, that should be fine. But we can't do the same for these. Now the reason I say that is because these are going to fire, and fire as fast as they can given the thrust limit, so we set this to 6, but they're just going to keep going. We can kill these engines the moment the test is over, but we can't kill these engines, so it doesn't really make much difference what we set these to, because they're just going to fire until they run out of fuel. So let's fire them until they run out of fuel as quickly as possible by leaving them on 100% thrust. So there we go. So we've got our 3 engines. Let's have a look. We've got our LV909 engine, which has to be tested while landed at Kerbin. We have our LVT45 engine, which has to be tested while landed at Kerbin. And our Sepratron 1s, which have to be tested while landed at Kerbin. So that should be a suitable vehicle. So let's head on out to the launch pad. I won't bother saving this vehicle. We'll probably never use it again. Let's just head straight on out to the launch pad. Fire up the engines. And collect our reward. So there we are. Hopefully that will stay nicely balanced. Now, we don't want to be charging off the launch pad, so let's set our thrust right down as low as possible. These are going to fire all at the same time, as is our parachute. Now we don't want that to happen, so let's put our parachute right at the top. We want that to trigger last, assuming we actually make it off the platform. If we don't make it off the platform, doesn't matter. We'll just recover the lot straight from the launch pad. So, just in case, we will set the T key on, the SAS on, and let's find out what happens. Excellent. Well, we now have a total of 4 notifications of contracts complete. 1 was left over from last time, and the 3 we've just completed. So let's press X to kill the engines, and let's check what contracts we completed. So there we go. We tested the Sepratron 1, so we can complete that reward. The 2 LV909s, we tested them. The LVT45, we tested that one. And here's the one we had left over from the previous contract. And we got a nice chunk of funds from that. So we'll collect that. We will recover this vessel and just see our mission summary. Right, here we are. So we didn't collect any science for doing that. We just got science from the contracts themselves. But we did manage to recover parts at the launch pad. So we got 100% of their value from the launch pad. We collected a total of 10 parts. Didn't lose any of them this time. Obviously we did lose some fuel, so we won't have got all the fuel back, and indeed we managed to use up all the solid fuel from the Sepratrons, because they just fire until they're finished. But we did recover almost 5,000 in funds, so there's a good bit of profit there. Obviously we got Jeb back, and he accumulated another 24.9 reputation, giving us a total of 199 reputation. So hopefully we will be getting some better contracts. So having done that, we can head back over to Mission Control and see if we've got any more contracts. Now I don't recognise any new ones, but we do have quite a few R&D contracts that we ought to try. Now, these test contracts tend to come in 2 forms. There's the ones that are test on the launch pad, and there are those that have to be tested in flight. And these ones can actually be quite challenging, because not only have you got to be in flight, you've got to be at a particular altitude and a particular speed. And the rewards are not necessarily that great. Now this is for testing the Mark 16 parachute, which I think is the small parachute we've been sticking on top of the command pod. We have radial mount parachutes, which we can stick on the side of pods and the sides of tanks. And this one has to be completed while flying at an altitude of 16,700 to 18,400 meters and at a particular speed. And we've got the same for these decouplers, but you'll notice the conditions are different. Now this one, we have to launch a solid fuel booster all the way into orbit in order to collect this reward, so that could be quite challenging since we haven't completed the Get into Orbit challenge yet. So let us try the simpler one of these tests, which is this one, to test the Mark 16 parachute at an altitude of over 18.4 kilometers and at a speed, quite a narrow speed range, of 290 meters per second to 590 meters per second. So let's pick that one. Now, if we didn't pick it, it would have expired in 2 days. But once we've chosen to do this particular contract, we'll have a year to complete it. So we've got plenty of time. But let's accept this contract and see if we complete it. Now, we haven't checked in at the science building for a while. We've got 86 science, and we only need 15 science, 18 science and 20 science to pick these sections. Now, I think we can probably pick all of these, and we will get the LVT-45 engine, which we tested a few minutes ago, along with the Sepratron and the large solid rocket booster. So we'll take that. We also get nose cones, some winglets, and a radial decoupler. We'll take that. And for safety purposes, we get this smaller engine, the engine we tested a few minutes ago, landing legs, and the radial mount parachute. So we'll take that as well. And that still leaves us with 33 science. But we need 45 for that, 45 for that, and 45 for that. I think you see if these icons are further to the right, they need more science. So that's why that one required less science than that one and that one. So all of these require 45 science. So we've still got 12 science to go before we can claim these additional scientific advances. Now, launch stabilizers can be quite handy for larger rockets. We've got winglets, another type of cockpit, a Stayputnik Mark 1. That's a unmanned control pod. Inline reaction wheels help us keep going in a straight line. That would be handy. And batteries, science. Now we need to collect as much science as we can, so that's probably our next target for our scientific research, and then a comms disc. But I think this is probably our next target. So 12 science. I'm sure we can manage that with our next contract. So what have we got in contracts? We've got to test our Mark 16 parachute. So let's go back to the vehicle assembly building then and test our parachute. Well, there we go. I mean, we could use this vehicle again. There was I saying we weren't going to use this vehicle. Well, maybe we can. So we've got the right parachute. I think that's the right one, the Mark 16. Yeah, that's the Mark 16. We've got to make it up to 18,000 meters. And we've got to be doing a pretty hefty speed, so I don't think we'll be needing that. But the LV909, which I think was the one we just got rid of, that's the small one. This is the 45. So I reckon if we put on some more fuel, we've got 2 fuel tanks. I think that's what, that's 1.5 size. Yes, that's 1.5 size. So after saying that, I don't think we're going to be using much of our existing vehicle. Let's just put on some of these tanks. Not sure how many we'll need. Let's try 4. So we've got to get up to 18,000 meters. Now you can see how much we've spent. We've spent a total of 5,372 funds to make this vehicle out of a total of 29,000, so it's not that much. Let's check our staging. We don't want our parachute going off while we're still ascending. So 18,000. Right, is 4 going to be enough? Don't know. Don't want to waste too much. I mean, it's only 18,000. Let's try it, shall we? Let's try this. So this is the Mark 16 test Mark 1. Let's save that just in case we need to repeat the test with more fuel tanks. But let's head on out to the launch pad and see how we're going to do with this particular test. Right, here we are. We have Jeb installed, ready to rock. Let's up our thrust, set T on, just double check that we have our staging right, and now you'll see when you open up the contract you get a tick when you've hit a particular condition. So let's launch this vehicle, and I don't think we've got enough thrust. We're using fuel. No, we're not. Why is that not launching? Oh, yes, we are using fuel, just very, very slowly. But I think this engine isn't powerful enough to get us off the launch pad with this weight of fuel. So we're going to have to find an alternative. Now we do have an alternative back in the vehicle assembly building. We can either reduce the weight or put a more powerful engine on. Now we have got quite a bit of fuel there, so let's try reducing the weight. Let's see if this will make us to 18,000 feet. Let's save this example, and if this doesn't work we'll try the other possibility of using a more powerful engine. Right, here we are again. We're back on the launch pad. We will put our thrust to maximum, set the SAS on, double check our staging, and we're ready to go. Still not powerful enough. Jeez. We are using fuel. I think we need a bigger engine. Let's go get ourselves a bigger engine. Now what engines do we have a choice of? Now the LVT-30 has a max thrust of 215, whereas this has only 200, so it's not a great deal of difference. What's that, 7.5%, but it might be enough. You'll also notice the mass is slightly lower as well, so that'll make the craft less heavy. So let's try this, and if this doesn't work we might have to go back to the drawing board. Now of course every time we launch a vehicle we're losing funds. Every time we revert we get our funds back, so we're kind of cheating on the funds front, but it's a game, who cares? Right, we have our Mark II, or Mark IIA really, I should have renamed it, back out on the launch pad. Now of course because we changed engines, it's changed our staging, so let's double check the staging. Get our thrust up to maximum with the shift key, press the SAS on, and see if this will get off the platform. Ah, much better. That extra power and that lack of weight is helping a lot. So here we are, we're flying over Kerbin, but we've got to get to 18,000 feet before our fuel runs out. We've also got to manage our speed. We don't want to be going too fast. We want to be maybe 300, 310 meters a second. Otherwise, if we get too fast, we might be wasting fuel, and we're going to be short on our fuel at this rate. So we're coming up to 200 meters per second, 5 kilometers up, and we're halfway through our fuel already. Now I think we'll reduce our speed because we're closely approaching 290 meters a second, and there's our speed tick, so we can start reducing the throttle to save fuel. Throttle right down now. We don't want to go over 590, and at this rate we definitely won't. Almost there. And there we go. We're going straight up at a hefty speed. But let's tap the spacebar and test our parachute, which is of course being dragged behind us at a rapid pace. Speed is coming down. The power of gravity and the power of parachutes bringing us back down to Kerbin. But at least we've got our confirmation that we've completed the contract, and we've been notified that as long as we make it safely back to the ground, we'll get ourselves 1,175 funds. Excellent. So 60, 50, starting to come back. You can see the velocity changing here, and back down we go. I think I'll switch the SAS off now and just let gravity decide which way it's going to point our vehicle. And since we have quite a bit of time on our hands, I'm going to use physical time acceleration just to speed our trip back down to the surface. Now the one thing you should probably try not to do is time warp through the parachute opening, because that does tend to have some catastrophic effects. So when you get down near 500 meters, reduce your time acceleration. So let's slow time acceleration. We're back down at 1 time acceleration. We're still doing 100 meters per second, but there we go. Parachute opens at about 500 meters, and we're still quite heavy, so we're going down at more than 10 meters a second, and that's usually the sign of disaster. But let's see how much of this rocket we lose, which will mean we will lose some funds because we will be unable to recover some of our equipment. Hang on, Jeb. Here we go. Ouch! Ow! Oh! Ow! Oh dear. Right. Well, 1 empty fuel tank, a command pod, and 1 parachute, and of course 1 Jeb. So let's recover this vehicle and check out our mission summary. Well, we got 0.1 science for recovering a vessel that survived a flight. It kind of survived a flight. As far as parts concerned, we got the command pod and we got some fuel. Well, not really much fuel if there was any left. And of course, we recovered Jeb. So, let's go back to mission control and see if we can get something a little more challenging. Here we go. Test the solid fuel booster in flight over Kerbin. Now it's a 2-star contract, so it's considered a little bit more difficult. So we've got to be going at a higher speed, similar sort of altitude, and we get a similar sort of reward. Now we're not going to get any science for this, but we will get some funds for building a more exciting, more complex vehicle. So let's go have a go at this contract. We'll need to go back to the vehicle assembly building and check out which engine we need to use. Now I think it's this one. We check our contracts, which is this list. Yep, that's the one. We need to check this out when we get up to 17,000 meters. Now I think this vehicle will probably get us up there, but how are we going to test whether this device, this booster, works at that altitude? What? Oh, we have these decouplers now. Right. Okay. So what we could do, if this is our launch stage, we can add a decoupler there to keep Jeb safe from the engines below. We have our solid rocket booster, which we can fire when we get up to that height. Put another decoupler in here. and we could try launching that. Now, these solid rocket boosters are normally used to lift very heavy loads off the launch pad when you're down in the thick part of the atmosphere. So we could use these radial decouplers for exactly that. So let's put our symmetry on. So there's our two-way symmetry, because I'm sure we won't need more than two. And we can put solid rocket boosters on the side there, and that is going to launch us most of the way past the tower, I'd hope. It will certainly lift most of this weight. This will then take us up to the appropriate altitude. We'll cut the engines, drop the stage, and then fire this rocket to complete the test. So next we need to sort out our staging. So we want these boosters, which if you look at the staging are these two at the bottom, and that to fire in our first stage. Now it's highly likely these boosters will fire first, so if we highlight these radial decouplers, that's that one. We then want to fire this one, and then we will fire this at the appropriate altitude. So then we will separate the pod, so Jeb's all safe, and then the parachute will open last. So I think that's the right staging. So we are testing the RT-10 booster Mark 1. Let's save that and head on out to the launch pad to wrap up another contract. And then I think we should try out getting to orbit, because I think we've now got enough parts and enough funds to get ourselves into orbit, and if we can do that we can get some more science. Now hopefully that's not going to fall over, balancing rather precariously on that engine. Nope, I think we're alright. So let's get our T key on, which will help stabilise us. Let's get our thrust to maximum. Now the thrust is only going to affect this engine because again these solid rocket boosters are fixed thrust. Let's open up our contract window and pin it open. So we're at Kerbin. Let's get ourselves off the ground. So we're now flying and we need to get up to 17,800 feet, meters I should say, before we then test this engine. So we're halfway through the solid rocket boosters and we're already making a hefty speed. We're already going off at a bit of an angle as well, so it doesn't look... I think we're going to have to abort. Get ourselves away from that wreckage. So I think we had far too much power for that stage. So poor old Jeb is going to be fired into space at incredible speeds. Re-entry effects on the way up. At this rate, we could have tested it. Unfortunately, I don't think we were in the right speed window. I think that's way too much. So, I think we rather overdid that one. Yeah. Jeb seeing stars. So let's do physics acceleration and make our way back down. Although that could be some time. We've even made it into space. Have we made it here before? Let's take advantage and do a crew report. Yes, we've been here before. So no point in keeping that data. Oh dear. Well, seeing as this is going to be a rather long trip into space, I think we'll leave Jeb to enjoy the sights, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.